All righty. Hey, everybody. I am just getting us ready to go live on Facebook. So for those of you who are on Zoom, welcome. We are talking about, well, David's talking about dogwoods today. And so we have some good information ahead of us. I'm just getting this published here right now. We will be recording today. So please, as always, feel free to send those questions in to the Q&A box and we will get your questions answered. I think David's going to go straight through the PowerPoint today and then start taking questions. So David, I will let you get started.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you everybody for joining me this afternoon. As always, I've got a bunch of stuff to talk about today. So as Sal mentioned there, I think what we're going to do is I've kind of set this up where I'm going to go through a bunch of information quickly. We really do encourage the questions, and so put those in your chat box, and then I'll go through this quick enough that we have several minutes at the end of the presentation for any of your gardening questions. As Sally had mentioned, our topic today is dogwoods, but before we get going on that, I think it's sort of important we say a couple things about the weather, which has certainly been in the headlines for good reason. March has just been wacky. There's no way to say that. I think one day we actually touched 80 degrees, might have been 79, but I think we got to 80 degrees. The following weekend, we had that crazy blizzard with temperatures down in the teens, 55-mile-an-hour winds. Then we had a couple of weeks of nice weather, then back down into the 20s, and Lord only knows what's going to be in the future. So most of you know this. Most of you are gardeners or have been tuning in often enough that you are fully aware of how erratic the weather is and trying to time our plantings around it. But I wanted to highlight this again, just real briefly to remind everybody who's out there watching. Also share this with your friends because a lot of people are new to gardening, may not understand this, and we can help avoid some cold damage. So these are the average last frost dates based on zip code. I put the website up there, just National Gardening Association, garden.org. They are able, you just go to that website, you tap in your zip code, and you will come up with a chart just like this. So this is for the 22030 zip code where I am at our Fair Oaks location. And this data is based on the past 30 years of average record. So they try to do a good job of keeping this sort of as current as possible. But these percentages, if you look at that, this is sort of across the top 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, so on. This is the percentage chance or the possibility of having a frost. So if I use this 50% opportunity, I scroll down here, I'm looking at temperatures, 32 degrees, which is freezing, kind of a frost date. And I look here on April 10, what this means is we have a 50-50 chance of frost, just based on the past 30 years. So when we say average frost date, that normally means that's the time when on an average year, you have an average chance of still getting frost. If you have tender plants, frost-sensitive plants, 50-50 is not really that great in odds. I'm looking more for like 80 or 90% chance of success, so I'm going to go scroll down here. So a lot of times I tend to use about April 20 as my average frost date. Again, that's an average. If it's a real tender plant like basil or tomatoes, it's got a lot of succulent growth or something on there, I don't even put that up until we're pretty solidly into May, because this is based on the last 30 years. Any year can bring any kind of surprises. And if you've lived in this area, you know that. But I just even today received questions, email samples. I get those for customers that were new to gardening and bought a hydrangea, lots of tender growth on there, put it out last week, only to wake up not killed, but damaged. This doesn't kill them, but then again, the plants are damaged. And hydrangeas, for example, they were putting out nice soft succulent growth when the temperatures were warm. That growth gets frozen off. And when that happens, that means your flower buds also get frozen off. So it's a real bummer, and we like to avoid that. So said enough about that. Just this is an odd time in the garden right now, and be conservative. We have some of these plants for sale, that we have even these cool season plants will take cool temperatures, but on any given day, you might want to be able to put them in the garage or put a cover over them or something to protect them if we run into or encounter freezing temperatures. Now, on to today's topic, which is dogwoods. I chose this topic because dogwoods will be flowering for us typically in the first week of April. So I'm hoping to get you all jazzed up about this and have you come in and buy a dogwood, plant it, and then get to enjoy the entire flowering season. So it's perfect timing for this thing. And I'd like to say, start out, we look at dogwoods, just the flowering dogwood tree, which is the state tree for Virginia, New Jersey, and Missouri. It's also the state flower for Virginia and North Carolina, is obviously beloved by a lot of people in a lot of areas, and all for very good reasons. The flowering dogwood is just a beautiful tree. We always think of the spring blooms, but it's got really nice structure. It doesn't get too big. It produces berries, which is terrific for wildlife. It's great fall color, and we're going to look at all these attributes and all the wonderful things that dogwoods offer. So I always start with the taxonomy, which may be of little or no value to you, but I fixate on. One of these days, we're going to have a session on taxonomy to understand why it is important. But within the Cornaceae family, the dogwood family, this is a pretty small group of plants. There's really only 2 genera. This family, to me, is really interesting, maybe nobody else, but interesting to me because it has changed so much over such short periods of time. I think I had last taught a class on this about 3 years ago, and at that time, there were actually 5 genera in the dogwood family. But with all this genetic analysis capability, looking at things really on a cellular level, the scientists have decided that no, a lot of these plants belong in other families. Because I was going to talk about like a Kousa up until not long ago, really, I guess it was around 2016, time goes by, was in the dogwood family, and they look similar, they've got similarities, but then you look at the genetics and they get bumped out into a different group. So we're now basically down to these couple of species. That one, this Allangenum, which I've never heard of, never seen, because it doesn't even grow in this part of the world. So we're really down to just this one genus, Cornus. That really here in Virginia, an immediate area, there's about 9 species that are native to us. So we're going to kind of take this group and narrow it down to that. It's still within that group. You know, we're looking at trees, shrubs that shed their leaves. You'll talk about opposite leaf patterns. We'll look at the flowers and the fruit on there. But when we discuss dogwoods, this is, of course, what comes to everybody's mind. Beautiful flowering tree. Like I said, this comes into bloom in April. One of the things that's so distinctive about it is the way the flowers open before the leaves come onto it. So it really highlights the structure, gives this kind of nice airy feel to it. And one of the things that we can look at in terms of identification characteristics, I'll talk about usually, because in biology, there's always exceptions. The leaves are opposite each other. They come in pairs. So that's a real easy way to diagnose them or narrow it down to where we have the leaves in pairs, and then you can see the tree, the flower. And when we look specifically at the flower, anatomically, this little yellow thing in here, that is the actual flower. So when you look at this flower that has typically 4, sometimes 5 petals, and we see the little floral parts in there, it is a cluster of these little yellow flowers, and it's surrounded with these bright, showy bracts. These are actually modified leaves. So as this plant was evolving, it had these little tiny flowers. They're opening in April. There's not a whole lot of pollinator activity going on because it's cool, or like right now we got 44-mile-an-hour winds. Ain't no pollinators flying around right now. So you're out here in an environment trying to invite or entice somebody over. Hey, I'm over here, I'm here. This is what we call it advertising. So some of the leaves that were surrounding this cluster of flowers modified to become bigger, more pronounced, different colors. So that's its advertisement. This is the way it's coming. Hey, over here, actually bring them to the flowers. It's a favorite in spring gardens for good reason, because it partners up so nicely with all the other beautiful spring flowering plants that we have in our landscape as we start moving into April. So our classic kind of combinations that you see throughout Northern Virginia, Maryland, our whole region here, our dogwoods with the azaleas. At this time of year, again, cool weather plants like the pansies, our spring bulbs. It's just such a rewarding and enticing thing to experience all of this. Now, dogwoods typically flower with a white bract on there, but what will happen is with millions of trees out there, or millions of cells dividing, and once in a while, one of them kind of mutates and it takes on a pink coloration. And as gardeners, we look at that and say, wow, that is pretty cool. And then we might identify that characteristic and propagate them. So we do have them both pink and white bracts on there. It's not just a spring flowering plant. This is one of the reasons I have such a love affair with the dogwoods. Fall color on this can be also exceptional. And you see that bright yellow tree, that's the hickory in the background, some of the native holly that's in there. So it really adds so much to our landscapes throughout the entire year. And the fruit on it is pretty. This starts showing up in late summer and carrying over into fall. The fruit, again, becomes a good food source for various different birds, as well as providing some winter interest. So again, looking for a tree that will give you full 4 seasons of interest, ecological value. It's just really hard to do anything better than dogwood is. So this is what I'm saying, because of our love affair with this plant, breeders will start selecting what we call different cultivars. That's short for a cultivated variety. You might, out of the thousands and thousands of dogwoods around, you might find one that has spectacularly big flowers, has prolific blooms. And in this case, developed, I think, down in Tennessee area, they developed a series here that they call Cherokee White, which is selected for the big showy white bracts that's on there. There's another in that series that we call Cherokee Chief, which has a very deep pink. It comes out almost red. It's classified as a red, but you have to use a little interpretation on these. I have what I'm going to call kind of my personal favorite is one that's called Cherokee Brave. And what happens, all these names, it's where we have, or not we, the breeders have selected a specific quality in that plant and have continued to propagate it for that. So the Cherokee Brave has this blush of pink with the white center in there. Again, that's just one that I absolutely love. So when we talk about cultivars, that's what I'm speaking to specifically. Right now with dogwoods, there's probably about 80 different cultivars to choose from. And people often ask, well, which is the best one? There is no best. This is, I say, it's like going to Baskin Robbins, 31 flavors. I guess they still have 31 flavors. I haven't gone there. And you ask a guy, what's the best ice cream? I don't know. It's a personal preference. You start looking at Cherokee Daybreak. This is where suddenly we find a mutation. Somebody says, hey, look, this one developed a variegated leaf. Isn't that cool? And so then they take cuttings and propagate and introduce it for a difference in leaf color. This one develops a double flower here. They call planting. Somebody says, wow, that's cool. I'm going to develop that. So then we just have more and more to choose from. Now, this little dogwood, Cornus canadensis or bunchberry, does not grow in our region. We don't sell this plant. I try to be really clear on that because this is what everybody, wouldn't you love to have this in your garden? I took this picture, I think I was visiting out in Oregon or Washington. I can't remember exactly where I took the picture, but you can see the similarities. I mean, this looks just like our flowering dogwood, but this grows as like a little woody, almost ground cover type plant. And it's just so amazing. It is, I found out, actually native to Virginia, but it only exists in about 3 counties in the westernmost area, like in high elevations. So you might find this out in Highland County or someplace right up there in the high altitudes, but it is not going to survive down here in the DC metro region. So it's just for show. But I wanted to emphasize how this group of plants, Cornus, can go all the way from, it might be that tree that everybody knows, our flowering dogwood, to where it could be even a little tiny, cute little ground cover plant like that. This is one of those underutilized, under-recognized, underappreciated plants in our landscape. Cornus alternifolia, or called alternate leaf dogwood. I was telling you how most dogwoods come with their leaves in pairs. This dogwood, if you look real closely, they're not actually paired up. They have a little bit of space between them. They'll have an alternate leaf arrangement. Sometimes it even looks like we call world leaf arrangement, where they kind of almost circle around the tree. So that's where its name comes from. It's a little bit of an exception from the rule. Now, this tree that you're looking at in the picture, I've been driving past that tree every day on my way to and from work for years and years. From the roadside, driving by it, 40, 45 miles an hour or something, that looks just like a viburnum to me. But it's actually a dogwood. When we get up close and personal, this tree does not have those big bracts surrounding it. The little flower, the structure of that flower is the same it is in our flowering dogwood, but it's white in color. The big bracts are absent. And when it produces a berry, there's sort of this range of colors, sort of from that dark plum to rosy color. Again, a fantastic native tree, good wildlife plant, and it gives us a nice burgundy fall coloration on there. There are many different types of shrub dogwoods, and these have been developed by growers specifically for their stem coloration. So with these, a lot of their primary interest comes in the wintertime. And you can see there's been so much breeding on there. I don't even know half the varieties that we sell, because there used to be a red twig and a yellow twig. Now there's all kinds of tones and hues that fall in between and combinations of there. And the really distinctive thing is for the winter coloration and the growth. Now, one thing I would say on all of these red twig, yellow twig dogwoods, their juvenile growth, when they're 1, 2, 3 years old, that's when the brightest coloration comes out in them. As it matures, so we start going 3, 4, 5, 10 years out in the road, down the road, it starts to develop bark, and that bark turns to a light brown. That's a normal characteristic. So a lot of times, if you're growing this because you really like the bright red juvenile stems, they will get pruned heavily just after probably almost at this time of year. You enjoy them during the wintertime, you prune them, and that kind of stimulates new juvenile growth to come up, and that's going to give you the bright red coloration. But it is a flowering plant. You do get the flowers, which are secondary. You can kind of see it cluster of these little white flowers. Again, they don't have those big showy bracts around. So if you prune them this time of year, you're sacrificing your flowers. A lot of them do have a nice fall coloration, and some of them also have variegated leaves. So lots of variability that goes on with this, and how you manage it, again, because I kind of opened that can of worms talking about pruning, really depends a lot on what your goals and your objectives are for the plant. And so that's where we need to talk one-on-one and figure out what the primary goal is. So that's my little introduction to all the wonderful, beautiful qualities of dogwoods. As you know, this is the virtual plant clinic. You tuned in, and I work here at the plant clinic. So I'm always every day looking at the insects, the disease, the pests, the cultural problems. So I'm switching gears right now because the bad news, if I can put it that way, or something we need to be aware of, certainly with dogwoods, is they get more than their share of pest problems. And you got to figure out what's going to be the best options for you in terms of how you want to manage this, and if and what's going to be the right plant for you. So number one on my list of party poopers is going to be this dogwood borer. This is a native pest that affects native trees, but it's a bad one because it kills dogwoods. It doesn't just damage them, it will kill them outright. This is what's called a clear-winged moth. It pretending to be a wasp. That's just part of its defense system of mimicry, where it has the clear wing structure on it, has the bands on it. It's a pretty good fake wasp. So if you're a moth and your primary predator happens to be birds and you're flying around the middle of the day, you need some kind of way to defend yourself. So this insect chose to pretend to be a frightening wasp. We rarely see these actually out active as an adult, but if you do, don't let it intimidate you. If you can get close enough to look at the antennae, you can look at the antennae and see that they're not segmented, they're kind of feathered, and you say, I know who you are. And that's kind of a dead giveaway. You get really close, you can see scales on the wings. There's these little telltale signs, but you got to get pretty close and personal. So that's the one that's doing it, but she flies around, she lays her eggs in the cracks and crevices of a number of different tree species, including the dogwood. And then larvae, this caterpillar, makes its way under the bark and starts chewing away at that nutritious part of the tree that's just under the bark of the tree. So often this goes unnoticed because it's unseen, it's inside the tree, it's behind the bark. You don't really see too many visible symptoms of it. What will happen in the tree itself, you start to see how thin this canopy is back here. We're getting branch dieback. This tree is going into decline with no real clear, obvious reasons, unless you know what you're looking for. When I get in there and I start looking, you can see this telltale bark that's cracked, splitting, coming off of here. This is a result of that borer that's chewing underneath the bark, eating at that vascular tissue, causing the bark to separate off and also stopping the flow of water and nutrients up into the canopy. This is a photo of a tree I received just last week from one of our regular watchers and customers. She knew I was talking about dogwoods, and she's like, hey, this is like my favorite dogwood, what's going on? And sent me some really excellent photos. Question is, you can't really see it in this picture, but this side of the tree, which makes up almost 2/3 of the tree, is dead. This side of the tree, and you can see a little different, the bark characteristics, is still alive. And she's trying to understand it's half dead, half alive. You may not be able to see it in your screen right there, but what I'm looking at, you can see a little wound that's down here. I start to see these cracks and fissures in the bark. I see a couple little openings here. The real telltale that you can't tell is in this wound. I can actually see, if in my computer, if I blow it up, the galleries, I can see where that borer has been chewing away. So in this circumstance, what's happened is, I think this tree was wounded or injured down here. That allowed decay to enter into it. Also, one of the key points is these borers, they are attracted to wounds and injuries because that's a point of easy entrance. Then borers got in there and have chewed their way through, and this side of the tree is now suffering. Client's still trying to decide what to do. She loves it. I think she's going to hold on to the remaining side of the tree as long as it lasts. So what can we do about this? One thing that I really like to emphasize is these pests, they're sort of opportunists. They are attracted to wounds and injuries that are on the bark of the tree. They are actively doing their egg laying in this May through June time period. So this is one of the main reasons I really don't like pruning dogwoods during the growing season, because where we create a wound, and I'm going to go back on here, these are very good pruning cuts. They were done correctly. They sealed over, they closed themselves, but and I'm hoping it was done in the dormant period. But if you have a wound or injury that's occurring during the egg laying season, that is an invitation to dogwood borers to come in there. Dogwoods also do best where they get sort of half sun and half shade. If they are growing out in the full all day intense sun, that also stresses the trees and makes them a little more susceptible to borers. So the way we manage this pest is to site the tree correctly where it gets, like I said, a good morning sun, but maybe a little bit of shade from that really intense hot afternoon sun. Water during extended dry spells or droughts. I said prune them in the winter, not in the summertime. That's what I mean, this TLC, just the tender loving care. The other options that we have are, of course, spraying with an insecticide during the egg laying season, because this has to be done before the borers gain entry into the tree, because once they're in there, there's really no effective way to treat it. So it has to be done on a preventative basis. And then what I really also want to talk about, and I will be showing you today, are resistant varieties. There are some options that are available to you less susceptible to borers. Septoria leaf spot and spot anthracnose. These are a couple of nuisance fungal leaf spot diseases that they're also prone to getting. Most active, like this spot anthracnose, we'll see in early spring. This stays cool and wet as the new leaves and the new flowers begin to emerge. We'll see this show up. So we'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks. But right now, as those leaves are starting to emerge, if it's cool and it's wet and stays overcast, then we start to see this leaf spot show up. This one, Septoria leaf spot, comes along a bit later in the season. These are not really even that harmful to the health of the plant, but it's ugly, it's unsightly. If it gets in the flower bracts, it causes them to kind of lose their beauty. If you are growing a variegated leaf variety and it's a focal point in your garden because you love the variegated leaf, it's not really doing its job when it starts to get all covered in these leaf spots. This is a leaf spot disease, which started showing up, I can't remember, it's sort of like the late 80s or 1990s time of thing. It started as a leaf spot, but it started gaining a lot of attention because instead of being just an ugly little leaf spot, this continued to spread. It didn't just stop right there. These spots started to coalesce. They would move down the petiole. They would start moving into the stems and the twigs. They would start causing branch diebacks. And this little dogwood had this disease, and over a period of about 3, maybe 4 years, it went from being a leaf spot to being a dead tree. So this was way more serious because it was killing a lot of native dogwoods, predominantly, less so in the landscape, but we were seeing very high mortality rates. It's spreading quickly. It was behaving kind of like this guy. So they called it an anthracnose, but later, it took several years to get an exact ID on it, and it turns out it's not really an anthracnose. It's this disease. It's called Discula destructiva, which now has this name just called dogwood anthracnose. I don't expect anybody to remember this stuff. I just find it interesting, and it's my show, so I'm talking about it. So this little nuisance thing, there was a lot of concern it was going to wipe out dogwoods everywhere. The reality of it is, it took a lot of dogwoods out, but the resistant biotypes survived, and we still have plenty of dogwoods in our forests today. And then mildew is another common pest. Like I said, these plants do have more than their share of diseases and insects go with it. Again, mildew in I'm trying to remember, because I started finding this just before I started with Merrifield. So again, this all happened probably in like 1995 time period. We started finding dogwood mildew showing up on dogwoods, which had never previously been seen or recorded, but it started showing up. First time, far as I know, it started showing up here in Fairfax County, or at least that's just the extent of my knowledge. And over the years, what we found is it's mildew, just a powdery mildew, but it was kind of a mutation. It's a different strain of mildew that now infects dogwoods. It's pretty common. Again, these things don't kill plants, but it's just kind of a nuisance, especially in our landscapes when we're trying to preserve the beauty of the plants for our own enjoyment. So what do we do about all these diseases? Well, you can go out and apply fungicides, but as we talked about in other programs, fungicides, to be effective, they have to be put on preventatively, before we start to see the problem. And I really, really don't like the idea of everybody having to go out and spray fungicides on their plants as a preventive basis to prevent what are just kind of these sort of nuisance diseases. What has really worked better for us is over time within the industry, the growers, the breeders, the scientists start working on resistant varieties. So this is Kousa dogwood, sometimes called a Korean dogwood. Obviously, it's an Asian species. It flowers later in the season, kind of more towards late May, even June time period. So the tree leaves out, and sort of as soon after leafing out, it starts to open up. The blossoms like this style is very showy bracts. It's prolific in there, but they have a slightly different shape to it. They're more pointed. They don't have that little dimple that's at the end. And the fruit on it, like this, is about the size of a grape or something. So it's a different looking fruit. It's a different tree species, but still a dogwood. and they have relatively decent fall coloration on there. What happens, but this Kousa dogwood, it handles harsh conditions. It does better in full sun. It's a little more drought tolerant. It's shown to be resistant to these leaf spot diseases, resistant to dogwood borers. It doesn't really encounter the same insect and disease problems that we show. This is a very old Kousa dogwood up at Longwood Gardens. And when they get this big and this old, the bark starts peeling and coming off and adding a lot of interest to it. I have people all the time come in on some of their older Kousas. They're concerned when they start to find the peeling bark and say, no, this is normal maturation process. But back to this pest issue. So what happened up at Rutgers University, the plant breeders had been breeding the Kousa dogwood and our native dogwood, Cornus florida, had been breeding these two together for better resistance to dogwood borer. It turns out they inherit some of the properties of both, and they turned out where they are insect and disease resistant. They are resistant to the borers. They are resistant to the spot anthracnose. They tend to be resistant to the mildew, and only minor leaf spots on them. So this is another option that you might want to consider. They call them the Stellar series. I can't remember, there's probably like 7 different ones are available now. They continue to breed them out of there, but they have names like Aurora, Constellation. This one they call Stellar Pink. It's just got a little blush of pink in there. But they are intermediate between the two species dogwoods. If our native dogwood is blooming for us in April, these guys start blooming sort of late April, maybe even into early May. And then the Kousa dogwoods are late May going into June. So you start to see really some of the qualities of both parents in this same tree. They are, for the most part, sterile. They don't produce the fruit. Their fall color not as dramatic as some of our others. So that part to me is just a tiny bit disappointing, but I love them for their durability. If you have room to plant different varieties and different species, that's fun, then you should do it. Now down in Tennessee, they've been developing like those Cherokee dogwoods, which are great. They continued with what they called this Appalachian series. These were bred more specifically because that dogwood anthracnose disease was coming into play. So the breeders have developed now, this is our native dogwood. This is a series that comes with a little better disease and pest resistance. So my hope there is it's a great group of families, but when you come in, like I said, we got lots of different varieties. There's no one best one for you to look at. It's a matter of sorting through what you like, what your situation is, and we are here to help you with all that. And now I'm going to take a breather, stop talking, and turn it over to Sally.
We'll have you talking again pretty quickly. All right, everybody. Reminder, as always, if you do not get your question answered, please feel free, if you are on Zoom, to hit reply to that email after we finish, and you can send me a note. I will forward it to David. If you're on Facebook, you can contact us through the website. And that goes to one of my colleagues. He will pass it on to David. So our first question for you is, are Virginia dogwood deer resistant? If not, what height or trunk diameter is large enough that a deer won't eat the branches?
Ooh, that's a problem. Of what I guess I'm thinking is a couple things. When they're very young seedlings, because I planted a bunch. You get these free seedlings sometimes through the Forest Service. So, I mean, these were like pencil-sized trees. Planted them, and the deer will eat them when they're very young like that. That's not even an escape-sized tree. As they get older, when they're maybe like a 1-inch diameter or something, which is a good size to start with as a landscape tree, they're really not going to browse or feed on it. But sometimes during the breeding season, the males will like to rub their antlers on young trees that are that size. Once they start getting a little more size to them, I'm saying like maybe 1.5-inch caliper trunk, then pretty much the deer are going to leave them alone. So in this long-winded way of saying it, when they're very young seedlings, deer can and will damage them. But if you step up to maybe a 1 to 1.5-inch tree, caliper size, at that point, the deer are going to be losing interest in them.
Okay, that is good information. Next question. Are the berries on the dogwoods edible?
I know for a fact that the Kousa Dogwood berry is edible. Some people actually like them and enjoy them. Because that was in my front yard. I tried a couple of them just out of interest, and they were, maybe it's an acquired taste. They're kind of dry and pithy, nothing I would recommend, but they are edible. Now there are other species of dogwoods, like I think it's called Cornelian cherry. It's an Asian species, which people will use that one also in jams and jellies. Our native dogwood, I would tell you, please double check this. I probably is edible because I know other species are, but I'm not well enough versed to really say just go eat it. Certainly the birds and the squirrels love them, so we put it out there as a good wildlife food source.
Okay, that's good. Okay, can you discuss a little bit? This question came in when you were discussing like the Cherokee Brave, Cherokee White, those different ones. Which of these are native? So are those cultivars, I think, of the native dogwood? Are those native?
Those are all cultivars of the native dogwood. So that's Cornus, Florida, which is our native flowering dogwood. And we have other natives like that. But I said it's one that has been bred and cloned for specific qualities. We also sell, and you will find a lot of trees, dogwood trees, that are just labeled white dogwood, pink dogwood. If you see just that generic unnamed white or pink dogwood, then that means it's basically strictly native. It's not a named cultivar. It would be the equivalent to what you might find growing out in the woods.
Okay. Next question is about the red twig dogwoods. Rutgers created a small dwarf red pygmy. Is it possible to have Merrifield special order, or do we keep them in stock? This might be a question for our plant team, but I don't know if you've heard of that one.
It all depends on availability. You're absolutely right. I would tell you to contact the store that's closest to you and ask to speak with the tree and shrub manager. Because we don't actually grow the plants, we don't manage the production, but we probably buy from close to 100 different growers. Yeah. So what would happen in cases like that, we're always happy to work with you. If it's available through any one of these different sources, we can add it onto one of our orders and bring it in. But it really comes down to the question of just, is it available?
Yeah.
But you'll have to check with the shrub manager closest to you.
Yeah, so anybody with questions about that is welcome to either call the store directly, or you can email me and I'll have the store call you, which is what I don't help with that, but I can put you in touch with people at the store if you'd rather send an email. So that's good. Thanks. Okay, next question. This is back to the disease you were discussing that caused the trees that look like the dogwood anthracnose. Was that the dogwood blight?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
It went around for a few years. I think it took them actually 7 years to get an accurate identification. We have much better technology now. So the name on this changed like 3 or 4 different times before they really got an accurate identification and set it in there. So yeah, you'll see dogwood blight. I said dogwood anthracnose, discula anthracnose, a bunch of different names for the same disease out there.
Okay. All right. Our next question, we may need a picture of this. This person has seen she thinks it's a lichen spreading from trees like sugar maples to dogwoods. She's seeing it everywhere. She wants to know if it's lichen or if it's something that she needs to be aware of. It sounds like we might need a photo of that, but you may have heard of something I haven't.
Yeah, photo is helpful. Absolutely. And you can send that to Sally and she'll pass it on to me. But people are always concerned about lichens. I look at lichens as a good thing, as a positive thing. Lichens are not harmful. They grow on rocks and bricks and trees. A lot of this can also have to do with the aging and the maturity of a tree. So sometimes very young trees where they have a smooth bark on it, they haven't developed enough character to actually support lichens. As it matures, the bark becomes more furrowed. You get more of these little micro environments within it. Then it starts to support lichens. This is all one of the beautiful, wonderful things that trees do for us in terms of supporting the diversity of life. So please don't try to scrub them off. I have people that try to remove them and scrub them off, scrape them off, thinking it's something harmful. They're usually causing damage and injury to the tree in the process. And removing was really a very wonderful life form from our environment. So
Okay,
Pictures, yeah, I know I get a little preachy, but hey, it's my opportunity to do that.
no problem. There's an arboretum in town down here that has like signs for all the different lichens that grow natives down here, which is kind of, I like going to look at it, but yeah, send us a photo if you want some more information. All righty, next question. Are the stellar dogwoods that are the cross between the Kousa and the native, are those beneficial to birds and pollinators, like native birds and pollinators?
No, they are sterile. They don't produce the fruit or berries, so they're not going to support birds that way. They're not going to, they may provide a nesting habitat. That's about it. And I haven't seen a lot of activity from insects or pollinators on it. So again, that's one of the really wonderful things our native dogwood does is it does support way more diverse wildlife than the hybrids do.
Sounds like there's some trade-offs to consider. All right, next question. How should we fertilize dogwoods?
I like to fertilize, and then I'm just saying this in terms of trees, including the dogwood. I think right now, this time of year, as they're beginning their growth cycle, is the best time of year to do that. I'm always going to tell you, fertilizer is kind of like taking a vitamin. A lot of us may take vitamins. We're not even 100% sure if we need that or if we're getting the rest of it in our diets, but we do it to kind of make sure our bases are covered. I kind of look at that same way with fertilizer. So if you can put on right now, dogwoods do grow in a more acidic soil conditions. So if you wanted to fertilize it, the Hollytone is a very good organic fertilizer that also helps to acidify the soil. And this would be a good time of year to apply it.
Okay. All right, now for a quick pruning question about the Kousa dogwoods. My Kousas were terrible to prune, full of suckers. Should they be pruned? And if so, how? We might need to do a dogwood pruning video.
Well, so dogwoods naturally branch close to the ground, and Kousa is really notorious for that. If you think back that picture, the really old one, I was from Longwood Gardens, I was thinking about that. It does not grow up on the central trunk. It branches close to the ground. Now, a lot of growers and nurseries will train them from a young age up onto a central stem, because in landscapes, we might want to plant flowers under them, might have walk under it, that kind of thing. So a lot of times these nursery grown trees will elevate the canopy that's in there. And they do. The Kousas produce a lot of suckers, I think, as a result of that. So I still don't call it a high maintenance thing. If I have to go through once every winter and trim the suckers off of there, do a little bit of pruning to bring the balance into it and stuff, I don't deal with suckers. I let them kind of grow during the summertime. I don't worry about it, trying to keep them removed. I just kind of live with it through the summer, and then each winter go in there and remove them.
Okay. Next question. What is the smallest dogwood tree we can grow in Northern Virginia?
Oh, there are some dwarf varieties. This is where I'm not well enough up to date, but I know I was back there looking around our dogwood selection, just checking to see what our inventory looked like. And I'm blanking out on the names, but there's some dwarf varieties, I think, of our native dogwood. I'm gonna have to kind of beg off in that question, tell you, contact our tree specialist. They can look out there. I don't want to give you the wrong information, but they might have some that are going to stay maybe under 10 or 12 feet, but double check me on that.
Okay, sounds good. So something to contact us for. We'll look into it for you. Next question. Are the Appalachian series more tolerant of the sun?
I'm going to say no. Dogwoods will grow in full sun. You can take a native Cornus, Florida, whether it's the Appalachian or just one that's growing out in the forest. They will grow in full all-day sun. But when they're in that much heat, or if we go into dry spells, it does put them in a stressed conditions. You sometimes get a little more leaf scorch, a little bit more browning around there. And when they're in that stressed condition, one of the things I didn't mention, but since you brought the question up, dogwood borer, the only time I have found dogwood borer is to occur on a dogwood that's growing in a sunny location, or it has sort of pre-existing wound or injury. And I think there is a direct correlation between the stress of it being in that environment and its susceptibility to borers. So they will grow in full sun. They're really prolific in their flowering. You can do it. But I would say maybe keep a closer eye on the borer issue.
Okay. Next question. All right. So this person planted 3 Cherokee Princess trees 15 years ago. Only one remains. They lost branches over time. What should we replace them with? Should we take out the last tree, which is really only half a tree? I loved the princesses.
I absolutely love that variety. They're tend to be a little more disease resistant than the others. Great flowering. It's a wonderful tree. My first thought, and again, you're welcome to send pictures, or now you have an idea to look for. It sounds like a borer problem. That's the leading cause of dogwoods dying, and that kind of progressive pattern of gradually declining, a branch here, a branch there, a branch here, a branch there, and over a number of years the tree goes. That's a normal sort of progression and symptoms for the dogwood borer. So just again, we'll have to talk about that in a little more detail. You take that kind of risk with them, but there are ways you can manage it. And a lot of times by just siting the tree correctly and those kind of things, we can minimize it. Okay. Otherwise, maybe you look at some of these hybrids. They're not quite the same tree, but they are borer resistant.
Okay. And just to go over again for the dogwood borers, you can prevent them, but once they're in the tree, like under the bark.
Right. The systemic materials we have available do not work on dogwood borer. That's something that's, again, poorly understood out there, but the soil drench that we put in works on the larvae of beetles. So if you have, for example, an emerald ash borer, that drench can work quite well on that group of borers. But when it's an immature, it's a lepidopter, but like if it's a caterpillar, then that material is not effective on that group of borers. So yes, the systemic products don't really work very well on that particular group of borers, not on the dogwood borer. And it usually requires preventative applications by spraying outside on the trunk of the tree.
Okay. Okay. All right. Next question. I know we're a little bit over. I'll do, if you're okay, we'll do 1 or 2 more.
I think maybe I need to do a little more, actually focus on borers one of these days.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of questions about the borers. Okay. Next question is, this person has 3 6 to 10 foot tall dogwood trees. They haven't flowered the past couple of years, but they do get berries later in the season. What can I do to make sure that they flower in the future?
Again, there's a disconnect there because no flowers, no berries.
Yes.
Those two go hand in hand because the flower gets pollinated and that produces the fruit, which is the berry. So either you're just missing the bloom or there's something in there that's not connecting. So we'll have to maybe, again, send an email in, send some pictures. We need to dig a little deeper in that question.
Yeah, definitely. Please feel free to send us an email. All right, we'll go ahead and finish on this question. I've had my dogwood planted for 3 years now. I got it from Merrifield. A couple of years ago, it suffered trunk damage from deer rubbing antlers on it. It didn't flower last year, but it has flower buds this year. Half the tree appears to be possibly dead. And just recently I noticed it, this tree's been through a lot. I noticed it has these small silvery white flakes at the joints of the trunk that looks somewhat like aphids. Any idea of what these are? I know I probably need to send in a photo.
So that brings up an interesting point that I like to emphasize. So the flower buds are produced in late summer. So the dogwood, let's pretend it produces its flowers in August. So the blooming decision was actually made last year. Those buds persist through the winter and then they begin to open now.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
But the fact that you are seeing flower buds on this tree that's been traumatized, to me sounds like a tree that may actually be moving towards recovery. So this is a positive development because again, those flowers were produced last year. I'm guessing that what you're seeing, the branch crotch is that silvery white flake, that could very well be lichens beginning to form, which we mentioned. To me, that's kind of a positive thing.
Okay, great. All righty. It is 2:50, so we'll go ahead and stop for today. To anybody who still has questions, please feel free to send us your questions. Send us photos if you're dealing with an issue with your dogwood plants. You can email those to me as an attachment, and I'll share them with David. David, is there anything you would like to wrap up with?
No, I think we've covered it. Again, just everybody, thanks for joining in. I enjoy talking to each other, seeing each other, and we'll just keep this party going.
Thank you. All right. We'll see everybody at our next virtual plant clinic. Have a great afternoon.